Welcome to the Market Me podcast with your host, Mike Mall. Each episode of Market Me deconstructs real campaigns for actual businesses to improve their marketing efforts. Mike is the founder of Social Media House and a digital marketing consultant who teaches marketing strategy to executives and their teams from small business to Fortune 500 companies. Let's get started.
And on this episode, we're speaking with Yoko of Yoko Co, which is a very challenging name to say, but catchy. I like it.
Good deal. Well, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your company.
Yeah, for sure. So Yoko Co, we are a web presence management firm. So we work exclusively with organizations that, the way we say it, have a passion or purpose beyond just profit. So we work with a lot of commercial companies that want to engineer some kind of change in the world and think about the impact beyond just the business metrics. And then, of course, a lot of nonprofits, associations, healthcare, and kind of transformative technology. Anyone who's looking to build a better world, the business stuff has to be done. Like, that's kind of table stakes. We want to lean forward through that into what kind of change and impact that has in the world.
Got it. Yeah, I love that. What's the driver of that? Like, what's your motivation? I feel like there's a backstory there.
Yeah, I mean, it came from abject misery initially. I think it happens to a lot of people that, you start a business, you try to get enough clients to start to grow. And at a certain point, if you're not intentional about it, which I wasn't initially, you start working with some people that really light you up and some people that kind of drain you. And we were working with a lot of people that felt really draining. And I had the privilege of meeting a woman named Allison Whitmire, who ended up joining our advisory board. And she had ended up challenging me around, like, well, how does the business intersect with the legacy you want to leave for your life? And what kind of causes do you support? And through that lens, realized there were some organizations, the ones that were lighting us up were like the ones where we were like, oh, we can see how this builds a better world. And the ones that weren't were focused on like nitpicky, little things, didn't think about the end impact. And what I found is the organizations that had a really inspiring mission also tended to attract happier people that were more fun to work with. And so as I thought about the impact that I wanted to have, we decided, this was at the end of 2014, to work only with the organizations that aligned with the interest of myself. And we were only 3 people at the time. So it was the 4 of us basically saying, hey, like, these are the things we believe in and we get excited to work on. So we'll only work with them. We fired it was like 25% of our clients that didn't fit. And then we said, we're only going to work with the clients that really kind of light us up. And this was like whatever, like everyone was talking about, like, oh, what's your BHAG? Like a big, hairy, aggressive goal. And for us, we're going to positively impact the lives through our clients, through the work that we do with them. We're going to amplify their impact by 100 million people by the end of 2020. And so that's come a lot quicker than it felt like it would. But we're on track. And so it just came from pivoting away from the stuff that felt miserable and really high friction and going with the stuff that felt, still work, but it's joyful work.
Yeah, I really like that. One thing that I found, and I think one hesitation people have to going into that space, is that a lot of, not-for-profit organizations, membership groups, the social good companies generally tend to be poorly run or like really bulky and cumbersome. So have you found kind of a happy medium of like finding a good clients in that ecosystem? I imagine you would have.
Yeah, I mean, it's what is it? There's a couple sayings around that where it's like the pace of government with none of the money. We're based outside of DC, so there's a lot of government contractors in this area. And like, to some extent, that's very true. They're not as well funded as some commercial organizations, but that's why we try to make sure we have a good mix. So, we do some work with some really cutting edge firms, based in, Silicon Valley, based over here on the East Coast in New York and such, that they've got to have the teeth for user acquisition and some of those, really cutting edge best practices as far as how they market themselves and appeal to users. And the nice thing about us getting to work with them is we stay sharp, and then we get to take some of those lessons back to the people that otherwise, wouldn't be able to afford a firm that could do that kind of stuff for them. And they tend to be smaller engagements, but I think they get a little bit, the ability to punch outside of their weight class, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And so do you do like end to end? It seems like I was poking around on the site. So it's like development, it's automation, it's marketing. So you guys could handle full service kind of end to end for a product.
Yeah, the reason we say web presence is we tend to focus on all the things that touch the web. So out of necessity, it started with just website design and development. And then what happened is we'd check in with these organizations 3 months, 6 months later and be like, hey, like, how's it working? Have you guys, continued to post on it? And they're like, no, we've done nothing with it. And it's like, it's nice that maybe when we redesigned it, it looked nice and it increased some user engagement or it got them to rank a little bit better. But if that was all it did, they kind of missed out on a whole bunch of the utility the platform offered them. So from there, we started offering, okay, well, let's do some email marketing. Let's do some social listening. Let's do some ongoing content creation, primarily for you to either use to support outbound efforts or, to attract inbound prospects, and start to have that conversation. And as we got a little bit further down that, I was, okay, well, we should probably be using video as a mechanism to get a lot of this content out of, some of your subject matter experts' heads. And then they could just talk about the stuff they talk about, and we'll take that and run with it and repurpose it across different platforms. And from there, starting to leverage it and, of course, report back, hey, here's how we're performing. Because we also, we're trying to measure the impact we have. So we're showing those numbers to them. Here's how this is pertaining to you guys. And by virtue of the fact we want to continue working together, there has to be some kind of return on investment. So it kind of gradually continued to grow out, but all of it was predicated on how do we continuously circle back to what impact this work is having. And if we can prove, hey, it's helping you move your organization closer to the goal it has, and you're, doing better than breaking even on all of this stuff, so there's actually a positive return that you can identify, they tend to be open to continuing to invest in it and continuing to grow. And that's been one of the nice things about even, some of the smaller nonprofits we work with is, certainly don't have budgets anyone would write home about. But if you can kind of take it and incrementally show them like, hey, here's a 2-to-1 ROI, a 20% ROI, and you can kind of continue to reinvest, there's a lot of growth that happens over a course of 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, being that you've been in kind of that game, going back even to 2014, what are some of the things you've seen, just like last year? I mean, this year's a little bit of a write-off so far, but what are some of the biggest, growth trajectories, or like what are the trends that you're seeing in the marketing and even so far as to say design space that's making the big impact now? I know video is a big hot topic right now, but what are you guys seeing? It seems like you have a lot of touch points with a lot of different businesses in different spaces. So I'm curious about your outlook on that.
Yeah, for sure. The content piece has always been a big one, especially with SEO. But I think that's starting to become refined, because I think as you're seeing people put out tons of garbage content, and I think we've gotten past like peak utility of SEO. There was a point where you could go search for something and find the best information. And now it's like you can find the best person at gaming a certain system, especially if you need, for the most part, God forbid, you need to go look up something like a health supplement or an ailment. And half the time, the only people talking about the ailment are the people trying to sell you whatever they've concocted as a cure. So trying to get back into the storytelling, and when there's such a wealth of content, what kind of things serve as a true indicator of credibility? And so what kind of things can you do to kind of set that apart? And if you don't have access to those, what kind of things can you do to make it a better story? And so if you can kind of tell that story, and going back to impact, those seems to be some of the big trends around content. So the mechanisms and the vehicles used to acquire the content and stuff are all the same. I think more people are getting comfortable with video, as it were. We used to have a lot of trouble getting, especially like higher level, more senior people to spend time in front of video, because they'd like criticize their appearance, and then they'd be nervous, and you get flop sweat, and then of course they would look bad on camera, so then you don't use it. But people seem to be starting to get a little bit more comfortable talking to the camera as if it was a person, and that lets them have potentially what would have been a one-on-one sales conversation at scale, which is I think something that's pretty cool, and it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. I'm not sure what you guys have seen with this, but whenever we put into practice, we did some like highly produced and kind of polished, almost more commercial videos for a client, versus some that are basically like our conversation, just look at the camera and talk, and maybe a little bit better lighting than we have. And the engagement rate, the watch time, everything was greater on the lower production videos. So it's like, not only did they perform better, it cost you way less. It was easier to stand up. So that's been a big one. And then, happy to talk a little bit more on what we're seeing on the design side too. But I think the content, being able to kind of differentiate yourself from just so much noise now, is really where a lot of the value's at.
Yeah, I think for us, it's been, I think as we all saw the Facebook groups putting a commercial in the Super Bowl, could tell they were really going to try and hammer that down. But
right.
We've been seeing really like community building efforts, like actually creating online community and stuff, be a really big driver of acquisition and leads, as well as brand affinity, which is interesting.
That makes sense. With the community building, what are you guys seeing around that? Because I do see a lot of people moving in that direction, and it's still early enough in the trend that there's, I think for the most part, difficulty for the audience to suss out the people that are, you know, doing like, I guess the best metaphor I could use is like whenever Tom Shoes did the buy one, get one, it was like, oh, like they really care about the mission and da da da. And then a bunch of people were like, that's a great marketing gimmick. We'll do it too. And yeah, we care about whatever mission it is. And so now it seems like there's some groups that are really intentional about, we're a group about these kind of people and this are the kind of people that we want to have on board. And then there's other groups that some of that stuff is lip service. And then ultimately you become a part of that member community and you're like, oh, this is just whoever has $50 a month to spend to sign up or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, it is a bit of Wild West. I mean, I think it's the same. I think it's running into the same problems as online courses did a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
You know, where it's like everyone's got one now, but like there's only 5% that are good and high quality that are going to drive you forward in some way. So I think that's a bit of a challenge right now. But I think even just brands creating a community, like a Facebook group for their customers, where there's a way to actually get in touch. I mean, email marketing is great, but email is always broadcast. And if someone were to have a thought or something to say, there's really not a mechanism or a method for them to get a hold of anybody or, you know, have people agree or disagree. Now, I mean, the mob can turn. So I think that's why some
Right.
brands can't do it. But I think if you've got like a really well-intentioned brand, building a community of your customers so they can find and communicate and create together, I think is a really smart idea.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I dig that.
And then what about from the design side? You know, we were talking a little bit before we came on recording about, you know, the rise of like a Squarespace platform,
Yeah.
for example, and like made for you DIY drag and drop stuff. Like where do you see? I mean, obviously there's a big lift towards that, but there's obviously, I think, a big need to have design for projects as well.
Yeah, that's, I mean, we're seeing, especially as we think about some of those automated and kind of self-service tools, is the turnaround time is getting quicker and quicker because there's the uniqueness and the trendiness of design, right? Which tends to kind of oscillate. And then it's like, oh, this is a cool trend. And then this is a cool trend. And that stuff evolves. And what, you know, used to provide a lot of value for designers, and the reason certain designers were sought after was the ability to create like a unique and highly differentiated look. And what we're seeing happen now is like, oh, this is like a cool trend. And then there's 1,000 Squarespace, WordPress, Weebly, Wix themes that are like a clone of that look. So it becomes a lot more difficult to differentiate. And where I think the unique value of a designer, especially a good designer or design team now, is being able to find a way to position design in a way that's not a follow after everybody else. So it's something that is uniquely built for the client and allows them to have like a true expression of their character or their originality, but still honors the, you know, human computer interaction component of what we're designing for, the medium itself, to make sure that usability is still really easy to kind of look through. And I think you see some unique examples that kind of break through every now and again, but especially with Google and Android having, you know, basically a chokehold on the entire app market, their design protocols really kind of restrict like, oh, we're going with flat design and here's what your icons need to look like. So a lot of that is becoming, you know, there's less character and there's a little bit more just commonality across a lot of the design field. And then you see things where like Bootstrap was a huge one that came through where it gave people a lot of tools, but it also made a lot of things kind of look the same. So if you're a brand that really wants to differentiate yourself, I think you're seeing that cycle of having to kind of turn things over happen a lot more quickly. And that period of, you know, self-service or follow after, or like somebody who can use a Squarespace or a Weebly to make something that looks kind of cool comparatively, definitely has value for a brand that doesn't need to have a lot of originality or just needs to basically put a you know, brochure or bulletin board or something out there. And I think it gives some flexibility. So it's definitely empowering the market, but I think you're going to see kind of a big rush to, probably going to be also a bottleneck, rushing up that mountain of like who can really provide that unique balance of, you know, true original design balanced with norms and expectations and the level of familiarity people have with their devices that don't add friction to the interaction itself.
Yeah, and that makes a ton of sense. And I think you're right. I mean, there are a lot of brands which are acting more like a commodity than a brand, and they just need an informational page.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I hear you on that. What are some of the design pieces or elements or assets that have come out recently that have like made your eyes pop out of your head?
Oh, I mean, this one's not recent, but it's the one that I think kind of encapsulates everything really well. That we've seen enough of the backlash happen. But if you remember on the web, there was like, you can show more than one picture on your homepage or on like a page with a carousel. Like, that's so cool. And then finally people realized no one watches past the first, carousel image or something. And then it kind of went back the other way. And then it got into video. And then people started to realize like, oh, could we have our whole 2-minute video play in the background? And you see the pendulum swing back the other way and kind of push towards like, maybe that's not the greatest idea. I think some of the things you're starting to see kind of encapsulate that right now is where the intersection of kind of native design and, web apps and websites are all kind of beginning to coexist. So you're seeing some of those things where people are aiming to carry over touch targets and stuff from an app and kind of make that more the norm on the website. And as I think we go more towards mobile, I think that's an experience that people are going to want. I'm also really interested to see if it ends up playing out like it did with laptops and, desktop computers, where there was such a centralization of everything happening as its own unique app. And then people are like, well, I can just do that at this website. I can just do this at this website. Like, I don't need to have all these apps loaded locally. I'm interested to see, because so many people argue that like native apps add a whole lot more value than a browser-based app or web app might include. I think that pendulum's going to go back the other way too. And I could be wrong, but I think there's going to be a lot of value. And once these become more ubiquitous across the board, that kind of web apps become where it's at, because it's going to be easier to innovate more quickly and, continue to enhance and adapt the offering and not have to worry about managing multiple platforms. And then people don't have to worry about, what runs locally, what runs remotely, and, how all that stuff gets accessed.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing it even in the context of like the Chrome App Store. Like, that's kind of like a subsection of what you're talking about. But there's some like really, I use a couple within that where I'm like, these are absolute game changers. Like, I don't have to go to a website anymore. I just, click on Built With or click on Bonjoro, and I'm like, oh, there you go. All this functionality that I need, and I just like touch this little icon up here. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Well, that's like two of my favorites are like Built With and a Wappalizer are like great, just to be able to say like, here's what stack something's on. And then I used to just use Awesome Screenshot, because it was like, oh, cool, I can easily pull a full web page. But now it has basically built in to the browser extension. Like, okay, cool, you want to do like a video recording of it, annotation, like all that stuff. So they're getting really good at packaging a lot of that stuff in.
And Grammarly. God bless
Grammarly is a lifesaver. I'm pretty sure if like Grammarly and like just spell check didn't exist, people would think I was illiterate. Like, it's gotten so easy to like misspell things and get yourself like saved that if that ever goes away, it's going to be just a lot of people talking past each other.
I literally had a paragraph the other day that I wrote, and it was maybe 4 sentences where there was like at least 6 little like underscore. Like, I don't even stop to correct myself. I'm like, Grammarly will know what it is. I'll just hover. Yeah, that's right. The one. That's what I meant. Yeah.
You'll fix it for me. This is great.
Yeah, I'm in that same boat. I'm a terrible writer. I
do like every now and again, like the auto spell on like Slack, like just stops working or something. Somebody be like, "What did you mean?" And I'll go back and reread what I wrote, and I'm like, "Oh no, they're on to me. It's no good."
So what are some of your favorite, like, as an agency? There's obviously remote elements of the work now, which you may or may not have had already. What are the apps? Are you guys using like the pretty standard app stack, like a Basecamp / Asana and like a Slack? Like, what are some of the cool things that you guys use that people may not know about?
People might not know about. I'm not sure.
We
fortunately we've worked remotely since like employee one. We were based in DC. Our first employee was in Chicago. And so now we've got folks that are mostly all over the US and a couple internationally. So the remote part has been kind of a natural part of what we do. Slack's obviously a big part of that. A lot of the Slack bots are pretty great. So if people haven't leaned into those, I think there's a lot of power there. We use one called, it's called SUP, like S''UP. And all it does is it just snags a random group of 3 people each week to say like, hey, you 3 should hang out and talk. And it does 3 because if you do 2, you tend to fall into like the same routine, but a third person like kind of rotates it. So when you can't have like a water cooler moment in person, we found that app's like a kind of cool way to manufacture some of those water cooler moments. So I really like that one. We built a little bot of our own, and I know we're certainly not the only shop to do this, where especially if you're developers, designers, copywriters are just staring at a screen all day. So it takes a look at your calendar and like when you have time blocked off, and then it'll give you a little ping on Slack to say like, hey, like maybe go refill your water bottle, or like just take a walk, or just look outside a window or something that's not a screen right now. So some people were a fan of that one. And then there's just a slew of really good Slack bots that are out there. And then beyond that, the stack is, probably all stuff you've heard before, Asana, Slack, those are both great. We use FreshBooks, which our accountant and finance department hate me for, but like, I think it makes things so easy for the client that I continue to use that. And then beyond that, we use Office Vibe, which is, if you've heard of like Tiny Pulse or 15.5, kind of a competitor with them. I really like it. It just pings people either via email or Slack. You can choose either every 1 or 2 weeks, and basically just has a slew of questions. And you can add your own custom questions in to see how people are feeling about their work, relationships with peers, deadlines, stress, compensation, all that kind of stuff. And it gives you a real good, like, kind of pulse on where people are at. And we found, it can be a really good indicator if something is happening that maybe we didn't have, some visuals on. Get a chance to kind of bring it into the light, talk about it as a team, figure out what we're going to do and adapt. That's been a really, really powerful, useful one for us.
Yeah, that's cool. I've never heard of that. Really smart.
Yeah, that's a good one. What kind of other stuff have you been hearing about in terms of like culture, and especially with everyone being remote now and trying to see how people are doing without manually checking in with each and every person just on a call like this?
Yeah. A friend of mine, Curran, has a thing where like that he actually consults with businesses on like how to generate employee engagement. I know one thing that I've been seeing a lot, and a lot of people make fun of it on TikTok, which makes me laugh so hard, is that like, they're like, no, I don't want to join your virtual cocktail hour. I've been on Zoom with you all fucking day. Leave me alone.
Right.
So, it's challenging. And I think, for us, we're really small. And so for us, we do a stand up at like on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. There's like a 25-minute, let's go through all the projects, let's see what needs to be done, and da-da-da-da. But honestly, I love FaceTiming people. I FaceTime people nonstop because it's like Zoom feel like you're looking at the window and you can see your little head highlighted. It has a business. It has a like, we need to be proper feel to it. Whereas FaceTime
There's a little bit more
like
formality. Yeah.
Yeah. There's like the animal filters, which are friggin' hilarious. So I like doing that because it's like, it has a feeling of like relaxed and goofy and not as on point. So I like doing that, even though we have obviously the capability to do it on Zoom. Yeah. So I try and take it off Zoom. I think that works for me pretty well.
Makes a lot of sense. I was talking to actually my mom, she's a social worker, and like I'm used to being on Zoom a ton even before all this happened, just because we do a lot of our meetings with clients in Chicago, Seattle, wherever. So we're doing them like this. But what she pointed out and what I realized is like, when you're on a meeting like this, it's especially if you got on a gallery view, you see everyone, you feel like you're presenting or on stage or something for the whole call. Like there's no point where like somebody might not be looking at you. So you got to feel like you're, good posture, good everything. Like there's no minute to relax and take a breath. And there's just, like you said, so much formality around it that, yeah, just even changing it up to like a FaceTime or a, Skype or something where it can just be like, all right, like, this isn't that app. It's a different place. It's a different room. It's a different vibe. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I've also seen a lot of people playing like online board games and stuff like Catan and Euchre. And like, it's funny. There's a group every Sunday night now. There's a group of like 9 of us that play poker every Sunday night. Same time. You know what I mean? It's like, the poker stars came back out real quick during COVID.
Oh, absolutely. Like I remember when everyone was there, and then, it sounds like with your group, we did kind of the same thing where a bunch of people were like, so you guys want to play cards? And it's like, it's been a good 8 years. Like, yeah, why not? Let's break it out. And then whenever they offered that like home game option, yeah, we've got the same thing where a bunch of people just once a week. All right, we'll jump in there and there you go.
Yeah, it's enjoyable. I mean, I'm in a bit of a unique situation because I'm living in a super warm climate, and like I'm in my living room, which is an outdoor living room. So it's like I'm experiencing it different. I'm going to look back on this whole thing like so different than other people, which I mean, I'm super grateful for. It's been great, but I can see like fellow agency owners and business friends of mine, even just having conversations with them, like the level of enthusiasm for most people is just so much lower right now. And I think one thing I recommend, and I'm doing it for me, and I'm having my clients do it, is like start building brand and start building community now. Now's the time.
Yeah.
Now's the time to pull the trigger on that Facebook group where I'm letting people in by invite only. So I'm finding people, curating the right people, and I'm going to create awesome content for them and make their businesses better with this. But if you're a brand that like a consumer packaged good, or maybe you're a not-for-profit, give people access to you in a way, and let other, letting them find each other and make relationships together. I think it's like, I don't know, I've been thinking about this a lot lately and having a lot of conversations about it. And I really think it's the next generation of marketing, because I don't think anytime soon, like most projects are on hold because everyone's like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know when things are going back to normal. And like, even when they do, like, we're not piling into an arena anytime soon. We're not doing, we're not all getting on the subway anytime soon. So it's like a strange time. And I'm like, I'm going to take the time to deepen, like go deeper instead of more horizontal with my marketing. It's like, who are the people that I want to like build that up with? And then let's like create. I love podcasting because, and I encourage anybody to have one if you're trying to grow your business, because like you get access to people that you wouldn't get access to. And when you're the host of the party, that like person you want that 15-minute coffee with, who'd regularly brush it off, be like, hey, come on my podcast. You wouldn't believe, like, you get that 15 minutes at the tail end. It's pretty amazing. So I've really enjoyed this process as well. And it's kind of the same concept, like, by hosting the party, you get a little bit more access and control over the situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it also feels like kind of a natural, like the end of a natural cycle, where we got to a place where so much of the relationships that we had and, the communities that we had were based geographically. And then it was like, we got access to everybody. And like everything is, we can find anyone anywhere. And now I think you're starting to find people revisit that, okay, that's not the dimension that we're really kind of locked by or limited by. It's an opportunity to say like, okay, cool. Like I still want that community, and I'm not going to have a relationship with 10,000 people, but I can still have a community rallied around and aligned. Like a bunch of our clients obviously have a lot of the same kind of passions and desire to kind of build a better world. So there's definitely an ability to create a community there. And I imagine the same with, your folks. There's a lot of those commonalities that it's like, just by getting people that have these commonalities in the same place, and like you said, letting there be some peer-to-peer discovery and the opportunity to learn a little bit more about what they each do and the value that's grown through relationships is huge. We're part of a group here in DC called Cadre DC, and it's founded by a couple, Derek and Melanie, and their whole thing is like they're super, super exclusive about the type of people they let into their group, and they're pretty quick if somebody's not a great fit or like overly solicitous, that they find their way out of the group. But I mean, it's been, probably core people, like 100 people or so that have been a part of it for, it's got to be close to like 8 or 9 years now. There's been so much that I've learned and taken from like each of those relationships that otherwise, would have totally passed by. There's a ton of depth and value there. I think you're right. I think that's going to be a huge component for a lot of people. And especially if you've got the credibility, right, to be able to say like, hey, you've known us and trusted us in this capacity, and there's other people that have too, and you're probably going to get along with each other at a bare minimum and probably get a lot from each other. And that's why we're doing stuff like that. And then thinking about just, so you're not one of those other add-ons like we see, and like you mentioned with so many of like the online courses, is go into it with some intention and think about what value you truly want to add to the group. Is it just a peer-to-peer connection, or is it content? Is it X, Y, and Z? Is it all of the things? Is it one of the things? But be really mindful and intentional about it.
Yeah, I like that. So I guess my final kind of thing is, what's next for you guys? Is it kind of, continue, maintain, spread the love? How close are you to your target at this point?
We update quarterly. So as of last quarter, we were We didn't finalize all the numbers because that's whenever some of the COVID stuff started hitting. But whenever we had even partially completed our calculations, we were at, I think it was 87 million. So I'm pretty sure we'll get to 100 million this year, which is really, really cool. So I feel really good about that. And then in terms of what's next, I mean, for us, it's kind of figuring out what the next boundaries for, the creative aspect are going to be. That how do we continue to do things that are of value with some of the skills that we inherently possess, but don't fall into the same, wash, rinse, repeat kind of cycle that I think you see with, the brands that, like you said, are, hey, we need a brochure up or we need something like that. And there's certainly utility to that. But I think the stuff that really kind of gets our brains really engaged is the stuff where we can look into like more interesting problems and how do you solve that with technology. And I think there's going to be naturally a lot more competition there as we figure out what those additional tools are going to be to help people differentiate themselves. But I think you're going to see a whole slew of brands begin to adopt that, probably similar to what we saw with kind of the rise of branded content. And I think you're starting to see more brands really kind of embrace that as a medium. It used to just be like, oh, if there's something that's very obviously like on brand for us, like maybe we'll associate our name with it. Now, I mean, you've got brands that are putting out, whole mini series that have nothing to do with them except for, hey, it's brought to you by, and hey, don't forget who made this possible for you, which I think is a unique relationship between like kind of the story creator and a brand, and almost like goes back to like old school, like radio days. And I think that's one of the things I love about podcasts is that more intimate relationship you get to have with your fans and the listeners. And when it's done right, in terms of like, oh, this is like a brand I really believe in, I think there's a lot of value there because it is like an extension of a community. It's whenever it's, hey, this person threw a lot of money at us and whether I care about it or not, I'm going to tell you about it, that those walls kind of break down. But I'd be interested to see kind of how that plays out in the long term.
Yeah. Real authenticity coming back into marketing. Who would have thought?
Right. Absolutely.
Awesome, man. Well, super insightful. Thanks so much for coming on. I'll link up all the company channels and that, but if people want to reach you to find out more, where's the best place?
So I'm just at, chrisyoko.com, CHRISYOKO.com. And then our website's, like you said, you'll link up to it, but just yokoco.com.
All right, brother. Thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you having me. Jeez.
All right.